Jujutsu Kaisen has a ton of curse techniques, and today we are going to break down every single one. I'm going to go in the order that characters are introduced. So we're going to start with Megumi and end with Kashimo. So let's get right into it. As I already mentioned, the first character I want to talk about is Megumi. Megumi uses the inherited 10 Shadows technique, which allows him to use 10 Shikigami that all serve different purposes. Each Shikigami must be exercised before they can be used. His divine dogs, Nui, Great Serpent, and Max Elephant are all mostly used for offense, while the Toad and Rabbit Escape are used for support. The only Shikigami he hasn't exercised yet is Mahoraga, which is the most powerful of the 10 shadows. It's so strong that Sukuna had to open his domain in order to defeat it, but no 10th shadow user has been able to exercise it ever. On top of these Shikigami, the 10 shadows user can also store items and itself within shadows. Next up is Gojo. Gojo has two techniques, the 6 Eyes and the limitless technique. The limitless technique is broken into 4 parts. The technique itself allows the user to control space at an atomic level via cursed energy. The first technique is Infinity, which is the ability to slow down incoming attacks infinitely. So basically the attacks will never hit. The next technique within Limitless is Blue, which creates a vacuum around the user or around a body part of the user. The world is then forced to correct itself around this vacuum and all matter within a range is pulled in. The next technique, Red, is basically the opposite. Matter within a range is compressed, and it is forced to correct itself by pushing away from the point of compression at high velocity. The final piece of the limitless technique is Purple, where the user combines red and blue, creating and filling a vacuum, and then creating a singularity. This erases all matter in its path in an instant. The other technique Gojo has is the 6 Eyes, which isn't really a technique from what I can tell, but it's hard to say for sure because we don't know a ton about it. It's implied that the 6 Eyes are the key to controlling the limitless technique with high precision. It also allows the user to reduce cursed energy consumption to almost nothing, and also most likely gives the user higher perception in general. But enough about Gojo, let's move on to Nobara. Nobara utilizes the innate technique Straw Doll, which allows her to use Jujutsu with a hammer, nail, and straw doll. This technique is broken into 2 parts, resonance and hairpin. Applying her cursed energy to a straw doll effigy, she can attack her target directly as long as she has some of her target on the doll. It can be anything from a limb to a single piece of hair. The damage done will hit critical areas of her opponent's main body and deal direct damage. This is the technique Resonance. The hairpin technique causes her nails to explode with cursed energy, and it seems like there might be no upper limit on how many nails this can apply to. Following Nobara is Masamichi Yaga. Yaga is capable of creating cursed corpses. A cursed corpse is basically an inanimate object that is brought to life with cursed energy. Most of the time, this cursed corpse is under the direct control of the creator, but there are exceptions such as Panda. Next up, we have Sukuna. We don't know much about Sukuna's innate technique, but we do know of at least 3 that he has. The first is Dismantle, which is a pretty standard cutting attack, usually used on inanimate objects, but it's also very effective against living things. His next technique is Cleave, which is a slash that adjusts its power to the toughness of the target so it always cuts them down in one hit. And finally, we have the Open ability. This is the fire ability we saw in Shibuya, but we don't know much about it other than it being stronger than Jogo's fire attacks. Speaking of Jogo, he is the next character we're going to talk about. Being the disaster curse of fire, Jogo's abilities center around, well, fire. He's able to create cursed flames and shoot rays of heat out of his hands. He can also create these insects which explode on impact, and these bumps which create more flames. Jogo also has a maximum technique in Meteor, which creates a meteor that he can use to do massive damage to a huge area. Next up are Junpei and Mahito. Junpei's ability is a Shikigami jellyfish. It is capable of paralyzing its targets via poison, and it has huge spikes that can pierce flesh as well. Mahito's ability is Idol Transfiguration. This allows him to manipulate and disfigure humans by reshaping their soul. It also allows him to reshape his own body into crazy shapes and weapons. This technique also allows him to use soul multiplicity, in which 2 souls come into contact and react. One way these souls can react is Bodies Repel, which forces the souls apart. He can also use soul multiplicity to create a double of himself and make a polymorphic soul isomer, which are high power and low durability transfigured humans. His final ability is Instant Spirit Body of Distorted Killing, which is just an insane title. In this form, Mahito's body is extremely tough and he is much more powerful than he is in his regular form. It's pretty much the peak that Mahito can reach. Next up we have Nanami. But before we get into Nanami, please subscribe. I know it's annoying to hear, but it really does help me out a lot. Over 90% of my viewers are not subscribed. So if even just one person who hears this message subscribes, it will assist in my goal of getting just a little bit lower. So if you like the content and watch it often, please consider subscribing. describing. Anyway, Nanami makes use of the ratio technique, which forcibly creates weak spots on an opponent. This technique can also be used on walls via collapse. Nanami also has overtime, which is a binding vow that forces him to use less cursed energy during the day, but gives him more cursed energy outside of normal working hours. Next we have Inumaki, who uses cursed speech. This allows him to imbue his speech with cursed energy, meaning anything he says must happen to the target. Anything from run to explode to shit yourself probably. It is an extremely powerful technique, but it causes higher wear and tear on the throat. Now let's talk about some of the Kyoto students. First up we have Momo. Momo can manipulate her broom via tool manipulation, which allows her to control the broom completely with her on it and on its own. She can also create a huge gust of wind using her broom via her wind scythe. Following Momo is Mekamaru. Mekamaru makes use of puppet manipulation, allowing him to remotely control cursed corpses. These cursed corpses can make use of cursed energy, but we don't know if this is the case for all cursed corpses or just special ones. Using puppet manipulation, he created Ultimate Mekamaru. This form has a whole slew of abilities, including a sword option, a spinning sword option, a shield option, boosters, and cannons where he can shoot off cursed energy from different body parts. He also created the absolute mode of Mekamaru, which utilizes the years of his life that he's saved due to his heavenly restriction. He uses the techniques Ultra Cannon, Miracle Cannon, and Pigeon Viola, which is basically a homing missile. He also created 4 vials of Simple Domain. After his death, he basically became a Bluetooth device in Shibuya. Next, we're going to talk about Camo and Chozo because they share the same technique in blood manipulation. Blood manipulation is exactly what it sounds like. The user manipulates their blood internally and externally. This blood can take many forms, from a bind to a knife, but there are 3 more notable ones that I want to talk about. The first is flowing red scale. This allows the user to increase their body temperature and pulse in order to greatly increase their energy and physical capabilities. This application can be stacked on top of itself under the right conditions. Next is piercing blood. This is a 2-step technique where the blood is tightly compressed and then released at supersonic speeds. And the final technique is supernova. This is very similar to piercing blood, except instead of converging into one spot, it shoots out into many directions like a buckshot. Next we have Mai, who makes use of the construction technique. This technique is pretty dogshit. It takes a ton of cursed energy to create one bullet, and even that has adverse effects on the user. And finally we come to Todo. Todo makes use of a very unique technique in Boogie Woogie. This technique allows him to switch the positioning of any 2 objects with cursed energy. It could be a person and a cursed weapon, 2 cursed spirits, literally anything with cursed energy. All he has to do is clap, and he doesn't even have to use his own hand to clap. Next we have the principle of Kyoto Gakuganji. We don't know much about this old timer, but his cursed technique uses a guitar to amplify his cursed energy into waves. Now let's move on to the next disaster curse, Hanami. Hanami has a unique ability in his disaster plants. This ability allows him to control cursed energy that looks like plants. This is why he's able to create huge structures like this and then immediately make them disappear. On top of roots, he can also create wooden balls that launch out sharp thorns at the opponent. And on top of that, he also has the cursed bud, which is a bud that feeds off of cursed energy to grow and eventually kill the person that is infected. His final technique is the ability to summon flowers as a distraction. He also has this other arm that can turn the life force of plants into cursed energy, but he does not get it back as he has to offer it to the flower on his arm. We never get to see this ability activate. Next up is Haruta. Haruta's cursed technique erases small miracles from his everyday life in exchange for storing larger miracles in the marks under his eyes. These will release automatically when his life is in danger. Next up are the remaining cursed paintings. These 2 make use of the rot technique, giving them corrosive blood and the ability to manipulate blood to a degree. They also use the decay technique, which infects anyone who touches the blood with a decomposing poison. Eso also has the maximum technique Wing King, which allows him to attack at long range using wings. This technique also gives him more mobility. That's everyone that's been introduced in the anime. So from here on out, we're going to get into characters in Jujutsu Kaisen 0 and the manga. Let's start with Geto. Geto uses cursed spirit manipulation, which allows him to manipulate cursed spirits. Go figure. To gain control of a cursed spirit, the user must consume the cursed spirit instead of exercising it. If there's at least 2 levels of difference between the cursed user and the cursed spirit, the user can consume the spirit with no issues at all. Once a spirit is absorbed, it will stop growing in strength. The technique user can summon these cursed spirits whenever he needs. And in Geto's case, he also has access to maximum Uzumaki. This allows him to use all of his cursed spirits in one powerful attack, but the main advantage is that it also gives the cursed user the abilities of all grade 1 and special grade curses that are consumed in the process. Alright, let's get into Shibuya with Ino. By covering his face, Ino can activate his auspicious beasts, where he summons one of 4 beasts. The first first is Kaichi, which is a horn that can be fired using cursed energy. The second is Reiki, which covers the user's body in cursed water that cushions all damage and increases mobility. The third is Ryu, and the last is Kirin, but we don't know much about either of these. The next sorcerer in Shibuya is Meimei. Meimei uses bird manipulation where she imbues crows with cursed energy and she can control them even at a great distance. She can also share her vision with these birds, and she also has Bird Strike, which forces the bird to hurl itself at an opponent with great force. This ability is actually extremely powerful, as the only person to ever survive is Gojo. Let's move on to some of the minor characters in Shibuya with Ogami and Jiro. Ogami uses a seance technique with her grandson. It allows her or a willing participant to shapeshift into another person by summoning their body. Jiro uses inversion, where the strength of the technique he is hit by is inverted, so strong attacks become weak and weak attacks become strong. There's also Mimiko, who has the ability to hang her targets with a rope, and Nanako, who can manipulate the subject of a photograph with her phone. We don't know much else about these two because they're both dead. Next we have Naobito Zenin and his son Naoya Zenin. These two share a technique in projection sorcery, which allows the user to split 1 second into 24 frames and trace a set of movements that execute in that second. While active, anything that is touched by a user also has to move at 24 frames a second, or they will be frozen for 1 second. Now we have the final disaster curse in Dagon. Dagon makes use of water and the ocean in his curse technique. He's able to summon great amounts of water with no drawback at all, and he can also summon Sea Serpent Shikigami. Try saying that 10 times fast. It seems like he has a large amount of creatures he could choose from, but we don't get to see that many because, well, he also dies. Next up is Arata, who utilizes the technique Painkiller. This technique is able to quickly patch up injuries, preventing them from getting worse. The injury won't get better, but it will stop all bleeding and the pain of the injury. Injuries that happen after the technique is applied are obviously unaffected. Now let's talk about a major antagonist in Kenjaku. We don't know a lot about Kenjaku's technique, but it basically allows him to use the bodies of other dead people, and while inside he can use the curse techniques that the original person could use. This technique has allowed him to live for over 1,000 years by just switching bodies. And the final user introduced in Shibuya is Uraume. Uraume utilizes an ice formation technique. This technique allows the user to create and manipulate ice, and so far we have seen 2 applications. The first is Frost Calm. This is a technique that is capable of freezing multiple opponents in their tracks with ease. The second is Icefall, which allows the user to create large amounts of spiked ice that can be controlled telepathically. This technique works for offense and defense as well as crowd control, making it one of the most powerful techniques in the show. Speaking of powerful techniques, next is Yuta. Yuta makes use of the vengeful spirit Rika, which is under his complete control. She can act directly under Yuta or act independently under his orders. Rika is an extremely powerful cursed spirit on her own, but she also grants Yuta the ability to copy other cursed techniques. We have seen him use this ability with cursed speech, sky manipulation, and more. Now we're going to get into some of the culling game characters. For this arc, I'm only going to mention characters that play an important role in the plot. This is because there are so many new curse users, and most of them don't matter at all, so I might as well save the time and cut them out. So let's start with Kirara, whose innate technique is Love Rendezvous, which places a star on people and forces them to follow a set path. If 2 stars target one other star, they will be forced together, and the order the others must follow is Imai, Akrux, Mimosa, Jinin, and Garux. I'm not gonna lie, out of every curse technique in the entire show, this is the one that confuses me the most. So if you understand how it works, I would greatly appreciate it if you could explain it in the comments below. And next, we have Hakari. Hakari has an innate technique and a unique cursed energy attribute, which is a new concept introduced in this arc. His cursed energy has the roughness of sandpaper, giving his blunt, close combat attacks a sharper edge. His innate technique is Private Pure Love Train, which allows him to manipulate probability and gain special attributes depending on his luck. It is very closely tied to his domain, which allows him to manipulate the probability of a pachinko type game. If he wins jackpot, he will get a bonus of unlimited cursed energy for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, at which time the process repeats again. Next we have Hirami Higurua. Hirami makes use of a Shikigami that resembles the justice system. This Shikigami is closely related to his domain and his second curse technique, Deadly Sentencing. This technique looks into the opponent's history for any crimes, and if the opponent has no defense or rebuttal, they are sentenced to death, which gives Hiromi a huge sword to kill them with. However, since the rules of the domain follow a real court, the opponent can also ask for a retrial, which could have a different outcome. And finally, the last person we are going to talk about is Kashimo. We don't know Kashimo's innate technique yet, but it most likely has to do with the electricity. Much like Hakari, his cursed energy has a special attribute, and this time it's electricity. This puts his body in a constant state of electrification, making his cursed energy attacks impossible impossible to defend against because they electrocute their opponents on impact. He is also capable of discharging lightning by separating the positive charge of his cursed energy and putting it on the target. This attack is similar to a domain's guaranteed hit as it is impossible to dodge, however he does need time to recharge after he uses it. And that's everyone. I know Noya is doing something weird in the current chapter, but I'm only on chapter 190, so I'm not going to talk about his new techniques yet, or whatever you want to call them. So that's the end of the video. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing. It would really mean a lot, and we're steadily approaching 3,000 subs. If you're already subscribed, maybe check out the Discord or the Patreon. I would appreciate it a lot. Thank you again, and I'll see you next week.